Welcome to the Intentional Clinician Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Krauss, licensed professional counselor. The Intentional Clinician is all about demystifying the topics of counseling and psychology and talking about how to apply concepts found in those to our everyday life. In a sense, I will be talking mental health as a fundamental part of living a vibrant and full life. I will touch on philosophy, sociology, and many other topics, but I aim to do it from a down-to-earth perspective. And I hope to share my gift of making the topics of psychology, philosophy, and mental health practical and useful for your life. I don't want to use a bunch of pie-in-the-sky, lofty and obtuse language to describe about some optimal existence that only a few can ascribe to. I want to get down and dirty and really help anyone who may be listening. As they say, everything begins with a story. So throughout this first podcast, I'm going to be touching on a little bit of my story, so you can understand me and a little bit about why I'm doing this podcast and how I became a licensed professional counselor. Since I was about 6 years old, I lived in a motel that my parents owned. And living in that motel until I was about 18, I had a lot of interesting experiences and was able to meet people from all walks of life, going through all sorts of things. And I had to learn to talk to them. I had to answer the phone at the motel. I had to answer the door at the motel, check people in, help clean rooms, talk to guests. And it was a small motel in a small town in Michigan, outside of the capital city. And I learned a lot of things that I did not learn in school, just from talking to people and getting to know them. And I learned that no matter what people's background and how much money they had, or what country they were from, or what state they were from, people had a lot of things in common. People were very concerned with relationships. That's often why they were staying in our motel. They were coming to visit somebody. People were concerned with meaning. People were on some sort of quest. They were coming to the university for some reason that was nearby. They were coming to visit a long-lost friend. Maybe they were studying something and they were just staying with us for a while. They were on a trip across the United States. And I just learned to really trust people, in a sense. Not trust everybody. Obviously, living in a motel, there were many circumstances in which we had to keep our guard up and be careful about who was staying with us and for how long. But I just learned a lot about people and a lot of ways to relate to people and not to be afraid of people based on their looks. Most of the time I assumed something about somebody, I was wrong. And when you really get to know people's stories, it can really humanize them and you'll learn from it. Learning from different people. So that was part of my background. I also had a lot of confusion growing up in my life. I will get into that probably more later. It's a very personal story, but just because of what was happening with my parents and their lives and where we lived, I didn't really understand a lot about why I did the things I did, thought the things I thought. And I didn't understand a lot about psychology and behavior. So, of course, later on in my life, I ended up studying psychology in college. I'd switched from being an education major. I tried to do my major in psychology, but it was a lot of money, so I just graduated with a minor in psychology and then went on to grad school because I had an education degree already. So I'll get more into my story, but I want to talk a little bit about transformation, because no matter who you are or where you are living and what's going on in your life, a lot of people want to change. They want to change what's going on circumstantially. They want to change what is going on inside. They want to feel differently. And I know that counseling and psychology can help people feel better. But what I'm really interested in, besides all of that, is transformation. Going through a thorough and dramatic change in form or appearance is really the definition. And I love talking about this because it is so exciting to know that you can change. I can barely recognize myself from the way I used to talk and act and behave 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, or even last year. I'm always transforming, even as a counselor. I have seen so many people transform their lives, and it brings me so much joy to talk about this and spread the message that you can transform too. You do not have to keep living the way you're living. Your circumstances may still be difficult. You may still have the same difficulties with families and things we can't change, but there is so much that you can change. And I believe transformation begins with understanding yourself. And a lot of the understanding can come through psychology, self-reflection, philosophy, spirituality. Yet you really have to start with the self. Aristotle said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. I had to know myself before I could change and transform. And continually, if I want to grow, I have to check in with myself, my true feelings, and what is happening beneath the surface of the circumstances I'm going through at a time. Obviously, it's also very helpful to know others and to really get to know others' stories and to really truly listen. But I often find that if we don't know ourselves, we are putting up some sort of lens or some sort of filter, and we're not really able to listen to other people. We're assuming they're thinking like we do in some odd way, or we aren't believing what they're saying. And I think that's part of the growth and maturation process. But that's why I believe starting with the self is so important. And I don't believe it's self-indulgent to know yourself, because if you do know yourself, then you can learn to listen to others, and you can change. And if you change, you can affect so many other lives in such a good way. And you may not choose to do things with your life that are harmful to others and the people around you. So a little bit about myself. I'm just going to tell little fragments of stories, because I'm not going to tell my life story in a podcast. But sometimes if we have coffee together, I definitely will. So I don't want this to be a 4-hour podcast. So here's a little snippet. I remember sitting in my history class at the age of 15, and I had this epiphany. It just like hit me like I'd run into a wall of bricks. I didn't like my school. I didn't like myself. I had this urge to be creative and to learn music and art and these things, but I didn't know how to discipline myself to practice. And I was having a lot of problems with that. And I was upset with my inability to have relationships I wanted, of course, being a heterosexual male, wanting to date girls my age and having problems with that. And just problems with friendships in general. I had friends, but some of the friends I had weren't really nice to me, and I didn't know how to put up boundaries because I wanted everyone to like me. And so I remember thinking, okay, I've got to do something. I've got to do something in this, and this feeling came up within me, and it was many, many feelings really, but anger, power, desperation, and I knew something needed to happen, but I was stuck in my life. Even though I was learning to listen to people's stories at the motel, and I loved hearing what other people had to say, and I loved reading books, and I loved, listening to documentaries, I had some sort of weird, distorted belief that other people could change, and other people could be great, and other people could do all these things, but I somehow couldn't. Well, that is what they call low self-esteem. That is a story I was telling myself, that I couldn't be one of those people that I was, looking up to. I couldn't be like the mentors in my life, the teachers in my life. I couldn't be like the people I met that inspired me, or the people I'd heard about or read about. I was screwed. I was doomed to some sort of fate of being this person who never had a voice. So I was sure that something needed to change, and so I just started to work really hard. I had always worked hard in school, but I didn't really know why. I think I was just trying to please people or get approval or something. And I started to change. I said, Mom and Dad, I want to transfer to this other school. I don't like this school that I'm in. I don't like what's happening here socially. I don't like the location and many other things. So I researched and I found a school of choice in my area. It was a great high school that I transferred to, a public school. And I started to take the classes I wanted. I was determined to do something. I didn't know if I could ever change, but I wanted so desperately to be different. So I read books. I began taking piano and voice lessons. I was terrified of some certain social situations. I had some sort of social anxiety I wasn't really sure about, but I pushed myself into so many situations socially and made many friends, even though I was terrified the whole time. And lo and behold, as I did a lot of these things and I learned how to discipline myself in practice at the age of 15 and 16, even, it was a hard time to learn how to be disciplined in practice. A lot of kids my age already had known since they were little, maybe because their parents had disciplined them and held them very much accountable or whatever, that they knew how to do these things and I didn't. I was having to kind of do it my way due to various circumstances. So, when you're learning something later in life, you feel a little delayed, and really you are delayed, and sometimes it takes a little longer to learn how to do these things. And so I had success. I really got to do a lot of the things I wanted to do. I made great friends. I flourished academically. I learned how to play piano and sing and write songs, and that's a whole nother story, and I still do that. I had people wanting me to come work for them at their business. I was offered jobs. I had a lot of jobs, which is another topic, probably like 16 jobs, all short term. Many things went well, even slightly in the dating realm. Things were getting better. But even though I had this strong resiliency and I was pushing myself, I had never done any inner work, so to speak. I'd never really reflected too much on my life through journaling or counseling or anything. And I didn't know myself. And so even though I was doing well, I had these awful bouts. I didn't get diagnosed, of course, but with anxiety and depression in early college. And there were issues in my life that haunted me that I just tried to push out of my mind. I didn't know what else to do, so I just made it up as I went along, and I didn't know how to ask for help. And you don't know what you don't know, so I never went to a counseling office. I didn't do any of that. And I had several years of these peaks and valleys where things were going well, but in my life, because I was working so hard, but I was working myself to the bone, and I had terrible social consequences and awful choices I started to make. And even though I had changed and I had a lot of skills, there were areas I didn't know how to change. I didn't understand relationships. I didn't know how to calm down when I was anxious. I didn't know how to get out of depression. And I had a lot of poor coping skills. Our culture in America is full of terrible coping skills. We have addictions everywhere: coffee, alcohol, food, parties, distractions, the internet, media, you name it. It's everywhere. Buying stuff. I didn't have money, so I wasn't really buying stuff. But anyway, it wasn't until I finally got into counseling when I was, I think, 23 years old that I finally learned that it wasn't just about white-knuckling change and hard work, although that's a huge part of it. It was delving deep and listening and learning what wise teachers had said for thousands of years from all different traditions, and really being honest with yourself and not just trying to achieve the American dream or achieve highly in the academic cool world or achieve in the artistic bohemian underground or whatever. These were all places I had gone, or achieve socially, or achieve by dating the hottest girl, or whatever stupid ideas I was trying to do at that time. in counseling, there was a space with my counselor who wasn't judging me, and I told her everything. And I told her about my family, and I told her about these things that haunted me, and bad decisions and bad coping skills. And, I basically had a space to make peace with my family story, to understand my half of the responsibility in friendships and dating relationships, to get to know myself, and to start having compassion on myself so that I could change, to free myself from easy answers and dive into the psyche of myself. And the psyche is also known as the soul. Understand more about religion and spirituality I was taught as a child, and all the confusion of the churches and things, and what it meant to me now. I started learning how to tolerate ambiguity. I started learning how to give up control, to get rid of my ego, and to understand that your ego can run you, and that it can run you ragged and cause all sorts of problems if you don't give it, if you don't stop listening to it all the time. Finding ways of working smarter, not harder. Learning to work on small things and be intentional. The Intentional Clinician, of course, the name of this podcast. To be able to focus on things and follow through one task at a time. So even practical things. It wasn't just this philosophical awakening. It was practical things, too, that I learned from counseling. And finally believing in my self-esteem starting, this is a lifelong battle, but my self-esteem is starting to come up and say, wow, maybe I could be a person that people respected and came to for help, and I could help people. My self-esteem began getting better. I learned to let my ego die and not worry about what people were thinking of me. And I learned that I had a habit of judging people and judging myself, and I learned to give that up and not judge others using mindfulness and other skills. I learned to think critically and more deeply without a bunch of my biases and traps from my culture and from different things I had learned. I learned to have relationships, and after about healthy relationships, I should say, after about 2 years in therapy, I met the woman I would someday marry. And then I had this thought. I said, wait a minute. So I did all of these things. I read all of these books. I worked countless nights. I practiced music. I had a band. We were somewhat successful. We did all these things. I tried to make myself cool. I tried fashion. I tried working out. I tried, smoking. I tried all these things you do in college that are completely ridiculous to feel better. And I had to just sit on a couch, pay someone money, which, I was like, oh, paying them money. Oh my God, I'm just talking to them. What is going on? Nothing's happening. And all of a sudden, a couple sessions later, I felt so much better. I was like, wait, I'm feeling better. So I sat on a couch and talked to somebody and reflected a little bit in a journal, learned a few skills. And the next thing I know, there's this giant snowball effect of good things in my life. I'm not saying that my life circumstances suddenly became magical and I took some sort of pill and I was dancing around with glee all the time and, picking flowers in a meadow and, painting pictures with my girlfriend. My life wasn't peachy, but I knew how to handle myself. I had confidence. I had self-esteem. I was overcoming adversity. I was coping with things. I wasn't just looking for easy answers. Our culture, of course, bombards us with that there's an easy answer for everything. Just call now and pay $19.95. But I realized that there are no easy answers. There's always a trade-off. There's always a cost. There's always something going on behind that answer. So I paid someone money to talk and sit with me. And I transformed. I had the space. And that was counseling. Now, I felt better after about 3 to 6 sessions. And I was like, wow, I'm feeling so much better. I've learned some skills already. But I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to keep going. I really want to transform. So I actually stayed for 2 years in counseling my first time. And I'll tell you what, it was one of the best investments I've ever made because it changed completely who I was. People have said to me, I don't even know who you are anymore. And that's in a good way, let me tell you. So whatever you're going through, as a person listening to this podcast, I'm not going to tell you how great my life is all the time. I still have problems. I still have struggles. I still have bad circumstances. I'm with you in suffering, and I can also be with you in the good times, and I've been through both. I've been lucky enough to be financially poor most of my life, and I've also gone through a period where I was doing great financially. So I know what it's like, and that's good. I believe any good counselor can learn empathy for people's situations and pain, but it is another thing to understand how money affects us, both the lack of money and the abundance. I've had both, and so when I was talking to my friend about making this podcast, and I was excited to talk all about these topics of depression and anxiety and mindfulness, and I even already recorded a podcast, which you'll hear later, about the evidence behind why counseling works and all of these scientific articles. And he said, you know what, Paul, you really, what people want is they want to hear your story. They want to have honesty and authenticity. So tell them what you know. And so that's what I'm doing today. So whatever you've gone through, as a counselor in my office, I don't just tell people about my life. I listen for their life. I give them space. I don't want to bring myself into it, except as a counselor and as a guide and as a teacher and as a fellow human, to humanize them and help them learn and help them see compassion for themselves and others, so that they can actually move into change and have that therapeutic relationship. But in this podcast, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell you about my stories. I'm going to tell you, as patients, I have been through those breakups. I have been depressed. I have been suicidal. I have had anxiety. I have had terrible grief and people die. I have been through traumatic experiences and had symptoms that were awful. I've had bad experiences with alcohol and other things, experimenting in my college years in different times. I'm not some perfect person sitting on a hill that didn't have anything bad happen to them and decides to come down and help people that are suffering. I suffer. I've suffered. I will continue to suffer. But I believe that with the right tools, with help, with support, with community, with all these things we'll get into in this podcast, that you can change, you can transform. You don't have to just feel awful. You don't have to have low self-esteem. You don't have to have this major depressive episode. Obviously, there's biological factors. Sometimes people have a major depression episode because they're lacking vitamin D or magnesium in their diet, and these things can happen, or they have seasonal affective and all these other factors. But in general, your mind is such an amazing organ and so resilient, and it can heal. And we'll get into neurobiology later and epigenetics and gene expression and things I've learned about in science. But just talking to you as a person, trust me, I've done this research, and there's so many more people that are smarter than me that are doing research that I'm reading all the time, coming out of UCLA and other places. And they've learned that the mind can change in so many ways, and that you can recover from everything from major depression to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, other things like that. So I've been there. I've gone through these things. I haven't maybe had all the bad things that have happened to you, and I haven't, been suffering from PTSD for 4 or 5 years or something like maybe that's happened to you, but I've been through things that are similar, so I can empathize with you, and I know what it's like to be in that position, and I also know what it's like to get the help you need. So that's what I'm being honest about. So I'm going to touch on a little bit more of the magic pill and get back to my life, and then talk about counseling here. So there are so many things in America we spend our money on frivolously each year, secretly hoping it will change our life. Advertising and marketing culture is great at this. This is literally the formula. There's a magic pill for everything. There's the right deodorant. There's the right smell. There's the right furniture. There's the right car. There's the right house. There's the right bicycle. There's the best computer. There's the best phone. There's the best phone watch. There's the best phone watch Fitbit. There's the ankle bit. I don't know. Self-care products. There's the best media subscriptions coming into your home. There's the best food. There's the best products for your home. There's the best products to clean your home with. while of course all of these things on their own are not bad and they can help us in many ways, not all of them are investing in you as a person. A lot of it, our culture, is based on consumerism and just consuming stuff and things. Stuff cannot transform us. Stuff cannot change us. Sure, a nice neck pillow on the plane will help you maybe get a few Z's, but it's not going to change your life. Books and movies and music, I do believe, as products, can really help us grow as people. And of course, food can change our health. But real long-term growth and transformation cannot come from just consuming the correct items or having the magic formula. Actual transformation and lasting change occurs from an investment in yourself, whether that be through counseling, through working out, through journaling, through community groups, through group therapy. Whatever it is, there's so many things I'll get into later: reading books, writing, getting mentorship, education, becoming an apprentice in some sort of craft. Lasting change occurs from continual investment in yourself, and therefore giving you the strength and the will and the knowledge and the wisdom to invest in others. So I'm not going to keep ranting against consumerist culture. This is where I live, and of course I like everyone else, I've bought things I don't need. But Gandhi says, be the change you want to be in the world. And I think that's important for all of us to, when we're upset about how things are going in politics and in our country and other things, to really just be that change you want to be in the world and live it. Live what you want to be different. So I'm going to get into a few more things, a little bit about my life and the field of counseling, and then give you some tools here at the end. So in my life, right now, I work my best to be content and grateful, and I am. But I'm never satisfied with my own growth. I do want to keep growing. I am almost 35 now. I've been in the field for about 10 years. But I still want to grow. I remember as a college-age person wondering why so many adults I knew seemed to find some story or some sort of mode of thinking that worked for them, and then all of a sudden close themselves off from new information. A lot of times, you'll hear college-age people talking to their parents, and their parents are like, well, you don't know how the real world works, you young idealist. That can't work, and that's not true, and da-da-da-da-da. And we've all had those conversations, or we've heard of that. But, in some ways, some people get stuck in time and in habits, and that can be restricting. I don't care what the information's about, whether it's music or climate change or learning that certain groups of people are actually people. But whatever it is, I remember vowing to myself in college that I never wanted to stop growing. Of course, I've been stuck in my own life and been blinded by from things I needed to work on. But when I came out of it and I actually worked on my inner work again and put time and invested in myself, I continued to grow and transform more than ever. So as a counselor, this is so important. I work with a lot of counselors as a supervisor. I supervise counselors in Arizona, and I'm going to start supervising counselors in Michigan and training people, because I've learned as a counselor I can't stop growing either. Every time I learn another skill in counseling, or I work on myself and I'm able to connect better with the people I'm working with, I end up not only helping the clients I work with, I'm able to help other people in my life or other counselors, and that is so gratifying to me. I feel so good about that, because just those little things we're doing and little things I'm learning, you can pass them on, and then they can help, your clients transform their life. And sometimes in a weird way, like I'll learn something new about philosophy, or I'll learn a new counseling technique, or I'll learn some way of working on myself, which eventually translates to my office. And I'll run into somebody who's like, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with this issue. For instance, I'm a parent and my young adult won't leave my house, and they're taking all my money and they're crossing my boundaries, and I just don't know what to do. And in my life, and I'll be able to say, oh my gosh, I just read this book about this, or I know this person here, and here's a YouTube video, and here's a webpage. And it's so odd how many times people have come into my life wanting to know information, or, oh my gosh, somebody I know is using drugs and I don't know what to do, and I don't know what type of treatment's appropriate. And I can't give them clinical advice, but I can say, oh my gosh, I just learned about this thing here. Here's a resource. Here's a book. Here's a professional I know. And you can go get help. And people have come back to me and say, oh my God, I could not believe that you knew that. And I was like, well, I didn't know that my whole life. I just literally learned that 2 weeks ago. So as a counselor, I don't want to stop learning either. And growing, because it's so important to keep up on what's new and just to expand your horizons past what you've done. So a little bit about counseling. Counseling, I've heard people say, is the only profession where the professional helps you get your life to where you want it to be. They go in detail. You can tell your counselor things you wouldn't tell other people. Doctors and surgeons can help you with huge problems, and thank goodness for them, and they can help you feel better. But they're not always known for being, holistic. Generalists, of course, very busy in their practices, and specialists are specializing. Your foot, your ankle, your toe, your jaw, your lungs, your, neurologist. Counseling is holistic. Counselors, we're looking at psychological factors. Your mind, how you understand the world, how you think. We're looking at social factors. What's your environment like? Where do you live? How's your family of origin? Do you have supportive friends in the community or not? We're looking at biological factors. Are you getting enough sleep? Do you know how to manage your stress? We know things about how the body interacts with the mind, and so we can say, have you seen your doctor about thyroid issues? Or have you talked to your doctor about vitamin D or magnesium or other things that can affect mental health? Or, have you talked to your doctor about your eating habits and other preventative approaches or exercise? We, as counselors, are working on your entire life. We are trying to help you get from where you are to where you want to be. Not to mention, we are bound by confidentiality, and a good counselor, and if you've had a bad experience in counseling, that's, we'll talk about that in another episode. You can email me. But we are bound by confidentiality, and a good counselor will never judge you. And so that should hopefully give you the space to talk about stuff you've never talked about, and to get that out of you and get that processed. As counselors, I believe, we believe in the human potential, your ability to meet your goals, to become the best version of yourself, to help you find a relationship that is fulfilling, a job that is gratifying, a sense of contentment in your life, or whatever you want. We want to help you get there. We have specialized training, techniques, skills, and knowledge and experience of helping others. As I said, I think earlier, I've been engaged as a profession as a licensed counselor for over 10 years. I started out in Illinois and Chicago, working there for a while. Then my wife was here for medical school in Arizona. We've been here about almost 8 or 9 years now, and now we're transitioning to opening a counseling office and moving permanently to the state of Michigan and the city of Grand Rapids, which is a huge change. So I'm in the middle of a transition myself. So there's this quote I like when I'm talking about transformation and counseling and all of these things. We don't always have the right answer right away, and we don't always get the results we want right away, but persistence is important. Calvin Coolidge was the 30th president of the United States. He said, "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination are omnipotent. The slogan 'Press On' has solved and will always solve the problems of the human race." And I do believe persistence, because sometimes you don't know what's going on, and it takes a while to understand it. So when someone is coming to me, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or even afflicted with a substance use issue, and they are so, quote, in it, that many times their mind literally believes there's no way out. That's a symptom. And they don't know what they don't know, and they think that this is their life and this is how it always will be, which is, of course, another symptom. People will tell them, keep your head up, it gets better. Just try harder. You should go to church. You should join a gym. You should read this book. Take this supplement I'm taking for my diet, or whatever. But that sort of advice people get from their friends or people that aren't willing to go into the depths with them, it sounds totally ridiculous to the person suffering. But then again, you wouldn't know that your life could change if you've never been to counseling or you've never experienced a healing relationship, and most people just have been judging you in your life. In one of the next episodes, I'll discuss that counseling works for most people, and I'll just quote this real quick. In a large meta-analysis of 10,000 studies in counseling, the research demonstrated that there were two groups of people with similar problems. Those who receive counseling will be better off than 79% of those who do not receive counseling. That's, of course, Wampold in 2001. It's an enormous effect size. In fact, with an effective therapist, another study, science has shown that psychotherapy, also known as counseling, works even better in the long term and is more enduring than medication. That's from Brownawell and Kelly in the Monitor on Psychology from 2011. So we know counseling works, and I want to tell you, in case that you need to see a professional, that it's important that you do see a professional and don't rely on a podcast or a website or a book or whatever. But maybe you aren't suffering that bad, but you just feel stuck in your town, in your life, in your job, your relationship, and you just want to change something, and you're just tired of the mundane and feeling like life is this boring gray thing, and you just, earn a paycheck and do whatever. Counseling can help you too. Counseling can help you find, locate the emotional, psychological, social barriers that you're not even aware of, and work with you to move past those and to excel in whatever you want or change into a different situation. I've worked with business people, creative artists, writers, entrepreneurs, and I love working with them because they're usually really motivated people and they're highly successful, but there's these little things, whether it's a relationship or a personal issue, that are causing them to feel stuck, and they feel like they can't get to that next level or goal because this sort of thing keeps happening every time. And, it's getting in the way. And I love working with them using various methods, sometimes EMDR counseling and mindfulness, to help them identify those so they can really be where they want to be. So, let's see here. As we're talking about this, everyone has a story. You have a story. And a lot of times people believe that their story is done, that this chapter is the final chapter. This relationship breakup, my life is over. Since the war, I'll never be able to love again. I'll never get a good job. I will always be this loser. I'll never lose weight. I am always going to be anxious. I'll never sleep well. But that's a story, and that's when you're stuck in your story. So if you want to transform, it's important to get counseling and professional help, and to learn to be more intentional and to do these things. You can do these things. The mind can change. The mind is resilient. I have seen thousands of people transform completely. I've seen people meet their goals. I've seen people telling themselves all sorts of stories. I've seen people that didn't know what their story was. They were just confused. They had some sort of trauma from childhood, and they were beaten and abused and didn't know why they didn't feel good, and they kept going to the emergency room, and through knowing their story, they were able to just overcome and develop coping skills and resiliency, and be able to get the kind of life they want, find a job, find a partner. I've worked with people with crippling social anxiety that never thought they'd be able to make friends or even try new things or try new foods or get out of the house, and worked with them. I've got a lot of expertise in social anxiety, but just working with them and teaching them things, and then the next thing you know, they're doing like performance art and different things like that. It's amazing. I've worked with people who've been through car accidents that had thought they'd never drive again, we'll talk about that in a future episode, EMDR therapy, helping them overcome their traumatic experience. I've worked with people that felt trapped in their family story, and dealing with this inner secret that they can't tell anybody, and finding a way to break out of that and to be able to talk to their family of origin and to work things out, or to even just at least make peace with the fact that they can't work out. I've worked with people that never thought they'd ever be able to have relationships. I've worked with people that were in these jobs with the golden handcuffs. You know, everyone knows those jobs, the golden handcuffs. Can't leave, can't be yourself, got to lie, got to be a yes man, and helping them either transform themselves, and so their workplace had to take notice, or finding a new job. I've worked with people in a constant state of anxiety and depression where they literally just did not know there was another way to think and feel, and to get them out and help them over time. You know, sometimes it takes a while. Let's be honest. It depends on the level, of course. You know, I didn't make this show very clinical, but how long something's been going on, and how long the neurons have been wiring together in that way can really, you know, take a while sometimes. But it can, depending on how much investment people take, you know, when they're not in counseling, that's only 1 hour a week. When they're, you know, reading books and doing these other things, people can move out of these things fast. I remember people that were, you know, in college or just out of college and thinking, oh my gosh, I am just stuck. I've got to continue with this major, continue with this job, and working through counseling, helping them have the courage to go, you know what, I don't like this. I want to do this with my life, and I'm going to do it. And everyone's telling them they're an idiot and that they'll never have money and they're not going to be successful. And then, lo and behold, years later, they are, and they're doing something that people did not think was a safe idea. Helping people learn how to be intentional who's lived chaotic lives, and people that have lived in rigidity, learning how to be living in the flow. Instead of feeling rigid in the same routine, to break out of that. And for people that don't have a routine at all and are just all over the place, learning how to be intentional with their time, so that they can do what they want to do. And other people, you know, some doctors will tell you, oh yeah, you're this diagnosis, that's who you are, so here's this drug and you have to take this for the rest of your life. And, you know, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say in some cases that isn't true, but what in the world is recovery for? What in the world are these medications for? Medications are a tool, and I don't believe people have to depend on drugs forever to feel better. The brain can change, and the brain can even become resistant to the drug, so you have to up the dose. So I've seen people I've worked with, and I'm not doing their medication, but I've seen people I've worked with get off medication completely and never go back. Somebody I remember was told that they were this bipolar diagnosis at a young age. I believe they were misdiagnosed, and they thought this for years, that they were bipolar, and I diagnosed them with something different, and they were so scared to get off their meds, but they worked with their psychiatrist to get off the meds, because they got to a new psychiatrist who said, I don't really see those symptoms either. I just see depression. And then I remember this person totally got off meds, and they've been off meds for years now, and they've never gone back and have never had a manic episode or even a depressive episode. Not that they haven't had some depression, but they've been really thriving. So just because somebody gave you a diagnosis does not mean you are cursed for life and that you are just doomed. You can recover too, okay? So here's a little spiel, a little bit different as we're kind of getting to the tail end of this episode. People, it's not just about mental health. People are searching for meaning. We are all wanting meaning in our lives, even if we're not aware of it. We can use words like depression, anxiety, apathy, stress, panic. You know, no one wants to be labeled as depressed or anxious or having PTSD, but people want to be treated like an individual person, not a mental health diagnosis. We want purpose. We want connection in our lives. We don't want to be reduced to some sort of label. I've got the tools. I've been working in years in this field and trying to get better to help you move from just surviving to thriving. I want to help people no matter what their story is or where they are. And no matter if they're really suffering or they're having a fine time, I want to help you wherever you are, and I'm not going to discriminate ever. You can read some about my training and my experiences on my websites, paulkrauscounseling.com or healthforlifegr.com or counselingsupervisorgr.com. Got a bunch of websites apparently. So, as a counselor, it's important that we have a relationship with our patients, and I'll talk about that soon, but there's this quote by Carl Rogers I liked. He said, "In my professional early years, I was asking the question, how can I treat or cure or change the person? Now I would phrase the question in this way: how can I provide a relationship which this person may use for their own personal growth?" So, a bit of a thing here. Some people don't understand why they've had difficulties changing and transforming on their own. But I would argue that in the United States and in our education system, unless you went to some sort of great prep school, we aren't focusing on how to transform as a person. We're learning facts and we're learning how to do things and we're learning how to solve problems, but rarely are we even learning how to critically think anymore. I know that there's leadership academies and mindfulness in schools now, but I've been wondering, where is the class that teaches you how to be a citizen, how to be a good neighbor, how to cultivate relationships, how to overcome personal issues and shame and guilt, how to learn how to deal with your parents? I would love if we had a real applicable psychology or sociology course that was taught to students all across the country in every school. But I'll tell you, I've never had that class, and I don't know many people that have. Whatever transformation you've gone through or had to go through, we had to go find it. It wasn't a priority of our education system. So I'm hoping that this podcast inspires you, if you haven't gone after that, to go seek it, to go seek wisdom and how to live, how to be here, how to learn, how to grow, to transform. So I believe that the work the counselors do with their clients and the work that all of you do in your relationships is a ripple effect. When we empower a client as a counselor, they go out and do what they love, and they go out and love the people they love and do good things in the world. We don't know how far that effect will go. And whoever you are, maybe in your profession, you have the ability to be the change and to affect people in a positive way. The more mindful and intentional we become about our thinking behaviors, we can change our lives. The more we seek transformation and we change our lives, the more we can go out and serve others. We can actually change parts of the world. We can become inspired to find out what our mission is. We are all part of this human story, and we can all learn to work and serve and change our corner of the world. Some are called to leave home and comfort and work far away in a distant place. I myself have lived in 3 different states long term. One of the states I've lived in was over 2,000 miles from where I was born. I spent time in different countries. I have had the opportunity through college to do that. And all of these moves and traveling in my life challenged me. Life wasn't easy, but I had to learn to adapt, and I was forced out of my comfort zone. You really are when you get out of your hometown. But those experiences helped me grow as a person. But I'm not going to say you have to leave your home to grow or go travel or go to different states. But we have to find sources for learning, whether they be books or podcasts, education, journaling, going to a counselor, to expand our horizons. We do have to step out of our comfort zone in that way. On this journey of life, I've strived and learned and practiced and tried, but I've also failed so many times in the short term, and I had to keep working to become a more intentional person and clinician. Part of that is what I'm trying to share with you, and that's why I started this podcast and blog. I've heard people say that they don't think they can ever change and don't think that counseling works. Well, luckily there's overwhelming scientific evidence that counseling does work, but if you tell someone that, they're probably not going to listen to you, and it's not going to convince them unless they actually experience it. So if you're in a situation thinking you'll never change, it sounds like you're speaking out of pain. Maybe you have a feeling of being stuck or despairing in life. And that's where that old adage becomes appropriate: you don't know what you don't know. Counseling process helps the unknown come forth and become known so that you can learn what to do with it. You can deal with it. You can deal with the things holding you back. You can deal with the despair. You can deal with the blocks. And remember, all that you see is not all that is. You may be looking at the world through a certain lens. Counseling can help you clean that lens or change the lens so you can see a more vast and open reality. There's this quote I like by Robin Sharma. Change is hard at first, messy in the middle, and gorgeous at the end. And in my opinion, that's what's continually happening to us over and over again when we're working on ourselves. Just like the weather on Earth has seasons, we continue to go through a cycle of our lives, part of ourself dying off in the autumn, or habits or changes, the beauty in the leaves as the die-off happens, hibernation in the winter, the darkness, a difficult period in your life, then that spontaneous growth of the spring season, and living comfortably through that sunny and warm part of the summer, of course, inevitably on the way to another change in autumn. And just like that, the universe is constantly changing. Different planets are being formed in the stars far away. Other stars are exploding, and supernova and black holes are happening and disintegrating things. You know, back on planet Earth, rivers are flowing. Animals are growing and dying and having babies. Trees and plants are growing and thriving. So, life is constantly changing. The universe is changing, the planet Earth is changing, and it's hard as a human. We want things to kind of stay the same sometimes. We like normalcy, we like our habits, but if we learn to be changing in our own lives and being aware of what's happening, and we adapt, we'll be in alignment with what's actually happening in our lives, which is also happening in nature, in the earth, and the universe. So that's an interesting perspective to think about. As we close, I wanted to kind of preview maybe some future episodes. I'm going to be talking about how counseling works. I'm going to be interviewing someone on emotional eating. I'm going to be talking to somebody about anger, and I'm going to be talking to somebody about young adults and addiction, and many other topics: depression, anxiety, mindfulness, all those things I named earlier, and just how to become more intentional. I wanted to read a few quotes here about things, because it's not just about the surface and mental health, it's about the deep parts of ourselves. This is by Marie Rainer Rilke. Be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart, and love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms and books that are written in a foreign tongue, do not seek the answers which cannot be given to you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And so that's interesting. I'm sure we could all reflect on that. For me, it means sometimes it's time to stop analyzing. It's time to be patient with ourselves and really try to live in the question, and then trust that we will find the answer. To share with you another couple quotes. This is from an unpublished book by my mentor and friend Brian Sabatino, who runs Inner Work Counseling in Tempe, Arizona. And he wrote, "We're all in recovery from something: subtle neglect, dramatic trauma, abandonment, enmeshment, emotional abuse, depression, sexual abuse, anxiety, physical abuse, eating disorder, substance abuse, observing domestic violence, and so on. There are numerous other examples. No one goes through life unwounded in some way. But what is it that we are trying to recover? Ultimately, I believe we are trying to recover the essence of who we really are. Call it our soul or spirit or life force, our true nature, our identity, or humanity. Whatever we call it, we got lost in our pain. But that's what I believe. What do you believe? That's what really matters. However you think of it for yourself is where your inner strength and beauty lies. And no matter what you call it, it takes a great deal of persistence to get at it and get it back." And man, I wish his book was published. I guess you can just call up Inner Work Counseling in Tempe, Arizona, and bother Brian. He'll send you a copy for a small fee, I'm sure. I wanted to leave you with that because I do believe it's all about, becoming more human and really, being in that deep space too. It's not just about this mental health stuff. I've been reading lately this book, Care of the Soul by Thomas More, who I knew about because I love James Hillman, and I'd seen James Hillman speak before he died and seen him lecture, who is amazing, and I love his work, and Carl Jung's work, of course. But I liked that Thomas More boldly talks about the soul, and he brings that into modern medicine. And, he doesn't have to use that in the kind of the religious sense, but he uses it in more of a global sense. You can read about it. But he was talking about a list of certain things the soul needs, and I liked this. So I wanted to read it to you as we close. The soul needs a sense of home, deep friendship, and casual friendliness, a poetic and metaphorical appreciation for words and images, attention to night dreams, the fine arts, an intimate relationship with the natural world, acquaintance with animals, memory in the form of storytelling or keeping old buildings and objects that have meaning. We can do many more things to care for the soul, such as reconciling our sexuality and spirituality, caring for our children, finding work that we love, incorporating play and fun in everything we do, dealing effectively with loss and failure and inadequacies, and understanding that shadow is an important aspect of the soul. Of course, the shadow, which we'll get into in a future podcast, the dark side. That's kind of a short piece of it. But I loved that. Soul is more intimate, deep, and concrete. You care for your soul by keeping up your house, learning how to cook, playing sports or games, being around children, getting to know and love the region where you live. Soul allows you to become attached to the world, which is a kind of love. When the soul stirs, you feel things, both love and anger, and you have strong desires and even fears. You live life fully instead of skirting it with intellectualism or moralistic worries. And of course, he does define soul here. I continue to accent the difference between soul and spirit, another ancient idea, but one that I learned most clearly from James Hillman. Spirit directs your attention to the cosmos and the planet, to huge ideas and vast adventures, to prayer and meditation and other spiritual practices, to a worldview and a philosophy of life, or religion. Spirit expands your heart and mind, gives you vision and courage, and eventually leaves you with a strong sense of meaning and purpose. So he's kind of talking about the differences between spirit and soul. And in the best situations, it isn't easy to distinguish soul from spirit because both play important roles in everything we do. But making the distinction gives the deep soul its due. Spirit inspires, while soul delves deep into the complexities of an issue. Spirit likes to have a planning meeting. Soul likes to have a long and deep conversation. Spirit sets goals. Soul plods along, going deeper all the way. Spirit prefers detachment, while the soul sinks into its attachments to places, people, and home. The two dimensions are both important and valuable. You don't need to balance them, because balance is too perfect. You don't need to balance them because balance is too perfect, a spirit idea in the first place. It's enough to give each what it wants and needs in the moment. So Thomas More is talking about stuff that's super deep, and I think it takes a lot of healing and time, depending on what you're afflicted with, to get to a place where you can really listen down there, because there may be dark and negative messages coming into your mind. And so again, if you're needing counseling, make sure you find a professional to help you heal and get to that point. And if you're looking to know what I read, that book was from part of the book The Care of the Soul by Thomas More, which is a great book I'm recommending to people. I'm in the middle of reading it. And I will continue to talk about books and people and things that inspire me in this podcast as we go. So I just wanted to take a minute to thank everyone who listened to the podcast today. I appreciate your support. If you have any comments, you can leave them on this blog post, or you can email me, and you can get a hold of me at healthforlifegr.com, or paulkrauscounseling.com. And if you're in need of a counselor you're not in Grand Rapids or Michigan, you can go to psychologytoday.com and check out counselors that way, or just use the internet, make sure they are licensed. And I really appreciate your support. If you're in need of a counseling supervisor, I also do that. You can go to counselingsupervisorgr.com. And I'm excited to get into more topics. Coming up in the next few weeks, there will be many interviews as well. Recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss, and while these are based upon literature he has read and his experience in the field of psychology, they should not be viewed as the definitive opinion on the subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment or any other advice or consulting. If you are in need of counseling or consulting or advice, don't hesitate to make an appointment with one of the local counselors in your area. If you're in the Grand Rapids area or in Michigan, you can make an appointment with Paul or one of his associates by emailing or calling the office. The information for this is on healthforlifegr.com or paulkrauscounseling.com. If you are in need of a counseling supervisor, you can go to counselingsupervisorgr.com. If you are in crisis, please call 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Line, 1-800-273-8255. All right, have a great day.